Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Michael Kaiser, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and I want to welcome you to our Two-Factor Tuesday event here at Google. And by the way, the hashtag for this event across all of social media is hashtag Two-Factor Tuesday. And it really came about, we're working with the FIDO Alliance here and the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We're going to talk a lot about that later. I want to thank Google for having us in today. They've been a tremendous partner of the National Cybersecurity Alliance in our efforts to educate people to get 2 steps ahead and turn on two-factor or multi-factor authentication wherever they can across the entire internet. But let me give a warm welcome to the people in the room, but a equally as warm and maybe perhaps slightly warmer to the people who are joining us and watching this on YouTube. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good late morning, wherever you are around the globe. We are so thrilled that you are joining us here because we really see this as an international event. So I'll be back to talk to you later about various things and moderate a panel, but it's really just my opportunity to welcome Susan Molinari, who's the Vice President of Public Policy and Government Relations here at Google, to give you the more official Google welcome. I will just say, though, and you don't know this about me, but I actually worked with your father in Staten Island. I used to work for Safe Horizons, or Victim Services as it was called back then. Yes, and worked on trying to establish the Child Advocacy Center in Staten Island.
Which I got the anonymity to do.
Exactly, so there you go. So we have a history that goes back that we don't even know about, but anyway, so it's really
That is so funny.
It's really a double pleasure to welcome you up here today, and thank you for having us.
Wow, small. Now I'm going to go into my whole small world routine. Thank you so much, Michael. Now I'm also going to get back my Staten Island accent, so I better watch it. Whenever my kids can always tell when I'm on the phone with somebody that I've known from high school or grammar school, because I start with the sounding like I'm right out of The Godfather. Michael, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone here and watching from wherever. We're really glad to host you all here at Google, and I'm really honored to kick today's remarks off. I want to thank you all for being here, but I do have to give a special thank you to Michael, Kristen, and Brett for putting together this amazing and really important event. At Google, we're constantly trying to improve security for our users and make the internet safer, so it's great to see an organization like NCSA and FIDO Alliance working to raise awareness about the importance of the two-factor authentication. Two-Factor Tuesday is a great reminder for businesses and consumers to secure their online accounts by adding that second layer of protection. Both FIDO Alliance and NCSA have done excellent, important, historic work in this space. As members of the Alliance, we're really glad to have an opportunity to host you here today and wanted to support, we want to support NCSA's Two Step Ahead campaign, which has really done a wonderful job over the last year and a half to sort of get the message out. And like anything else, it just requires talking about it more and more so that people understand kind of how easy it is and how important it is. So we're really happy to be here with you all today. I'm really thrilled to also introduce our guest speaker, which is why I actually hobbled in today, and actually to all the women in the group, well, to the men too, I had a problem. I don't want to go into disgusting details about what I did with my toenail while trying to open a door, but then I tried to put on shoes. What shoes do you have in your closet that can fit over like a huge Band-Aid? So, but I wanted to be here because Michael Daniels is a really special person in this town. He is Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator at the White House. He's been instrumental in developing the federal government's national cybersecurity policy. I don't have this in my notes, Michael, but tell me if I have this wrong. Before this, you worked at OMB for 17 years?
I did.
So, ladies and gentlemen, oftentimes people in this town stand before you and call themselves public servants, and that's not really the case. With Michael Daniel, it really is the case. He is the real deal. So many times I would call him, and he knew he was going to be telling me something I probably didn't want to hear, but he would return the call, and he is in this business for all the right reasons. And so yeah, I also want to, before I do that, introduce, where's Sam? Is Sam from Google here? Sam from Google is going to be part of the second panel, and he's just super and terrific and really important to our work, and he in a very busy schedule, flew in so that he could be a part of it, so I want to thank him also. Again, for all of you for being here, but Michael in particular, in addition to all the work that you do and being a martial arts enthusiast, so everyone, I encourage you to applaud loudly when I'm introducing him, because he's taking names. But truly, it is my honor, Michael, to have you here and to welcome you, and again, to give me an opportunity to thank you for all that you do for this country. So ladies and gentlemen, Michael Daniel.
Thank you, Susan. So thank you, Susan, for that very warm introduction. So on the National Security Council staff, I am not known for being the little bluebird of happiness. I won't say that what people think of me too much, but I have noticed an increase in the amount of garlic that people are keeping in their desks in case I, sort of come around. But I'm glad everybody is here, and it's happy National Cybersecurity Awareness Month and happy Two-Factor Tuesday. It's really a great pleasure to be here, and thanks to NCSA and Google and the FIDO Alliance for putting this event on. I think, what I can do today is start off with a little bit of kind of my perspective from the White House about what we're seeing and how we're seeing the threat evolve and change, and then how the two-factor work really fits into that, and then a little bit about what we're doing on that inside the government itself. I think that from our perspective, you have this incredible paradox of the information age. This same technology that has enabled us to drive enormous increases in our commerce, to enable social connections across time and space in ways that we didn't have before, to enable research, to push the boundaries of human rights and democracy around the planet, is also a place that enables theft, it enables invasion of privacy, and it enables intrusions and potentially even headed towards physical effects in the real world, physical damage in the real world. And it is that really that sort of that dichotomy that we have to live with, that the very technologies that enable us to do so much good also enable us to do so much harm. And so with that, in that respect, I think it is also true that the cyber threat is not static. And we see three particular dimensions in which it is changing very rapidly. One of which is that the threat is becoming more sophisticated. The hackers who are carrying out the work that we care about have effectively industrialized the business. It's not the lone hacker still living in his mother's basement in his pajamas. That's not what I spend my time worrying about. It's the hacking business has become organized. They run it like a business. They run help desks for their malware 24/7. If you can't get into where you're trying to get into, you can call them up and they will help you. They operate on the principles of division of labor. They've read their Adam Smith. So in this context, and then you add in what another piece of this, which is that the threat is becoming more frequent because nation states have figured out that they can pursue their interest in cyberspace in the same way they do all the other domains of air, land, sea. And so you now have a place where it has become both industrialized and a part of the nation-state toolkit. And then finally, those actors that are out there are much more willing to be disruptive. If we've been having this conversation 10 years ago, most of what we've been talking about would have been the digital equivalent of graffiti, right? Defacing somebody's website. That's like the least of our problems now. Actors that previously showed some restraint are now clearly willing to actually move up the scale to be destructive. And all you have to do is look at what happened to Sony Pictures Entertainment last year to see that. And then at the same time that we're doing all of that, and that this threat profile is increasing, we're increasing our vulnerability. We are hooking more and more stuff up to the internet, the so-called Internet of Things, so that now your car, your coffee maker, your refrigerator, your Fitbit, every piece of equipment you have will be a threat vector. For some of us who have been doing this business for a while, we thought doing cybersecurity in a world of wired desktops was hard. Now we're going to do it in this very heterogeneous mobile world. And so it's just made that problem that much more difficult. So with all of this rapid change, with this growth in the threat vectors, with the growth in the vulnerability points, from our perspective, and the discussions that we've had with the president in the White House is that we very much see cyberspace and the internet as being at a strategic inflection point. For over 40 years, the United States and the other developed nations have been able to leverage cyberspace as a strategic asset to drive that economic growth, to drive those social benefits that I was talking about. But now we're in a place where if we don't actually solve some of the vexing problems that we face in cybersecurity, we actually risk the internet and cyberspace becoming a strategic liability. Our adversaries will be able to hold us at risk in cyberspace in a way that they cannot in any other area that we can think of. And that is not an outcome that we want. So I think from our perspective, that's what drives the level of concern inside the White House and why we put such a high priority on tackling and addressing the cybersecurity problems. As an administration, we've been really focused on, therefore, sort of trying to drive at three strategic objectives to meet this challenge. One of which is to raise our level of cyber defenses in both the public and private sector, in both the short and the long term. So how is it that we actually make cyberspace a safer place? Inherently make it a safer place to work, to do research, to do social activities. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But we also know that we need to not just be on the defensive side. We also, from the government side, have a particular responsibility to disrupt and interrupt and deter what our adversaries are doing in cyberspace. We cannot simply be on the defensive. We must also be actively disrupting what our adversaries are trying to achieve. And then lastly, because we know those first two things are going to fail some of the time the defenses won't work. And some of the time we won't know about the adversary until they've actually taken action. And so in that respect, we also need to improve our ability to respond to incidents when they happen and to recover from them more rapidly and effectively when they do occur. So within that overall context, I very much see the work that is going on with the FIDO Alliance and what NCSA is doing is contributing to all of those strategic goals that we are trying to do. But in particular, if you think about the ways that we know that the adversary carries out their work, if you think about the way that they steal credentials and use spear phishing and use all of those techniques that everybody in this room is now so familiar with, if we actually moved to a world where we killed the password dead as a primary method of security, we would all be much, much better off. Will that completely defeat all of what the adversary, what our adversaries are doing? No, but we can make life a lot harder on them. And frankly, I would like to spur a lot more of our adversaries to have Saturday meetings in their respective sit rooms wherever they are, and disrupt their weekends instead of mine with what the United States is doing. And I'd rather have them cursing me and what the United States has done to make their lives more miserable than the other way around. And so in that context, I see the efforts that are going on here is absolutely critical to improving the overall health of our digital ecosystem, and it really becoming just a fundamental bit of technology. And I see several people in the room that have spent a great deal of time working on this, and I appreciate Jeremy and the others who have put so much time and effort into that. Within this, I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing inside the federal government, because clearly one of the things that we have to do is get our own house in order. And I'm sure unless you've really been living under a rock someplace, I'm sure this little incident with the Office of Personnel Management sort of came to your attention. And so we've been living that for months now. And really one of the things that we have been trying to do for several years within the federal government is increase the use of multi-factor authentication for all sorts of access, logical access across the federal government. And one of the things we actually, in the spirit of never let a crisis go to waste, we took the opportunity with the OPM incident to actually double down on moving and implementing much more widespread use of PIV cards and other kinds of two-factor authentication across the federal government. And in truth, actually, we were able to make quite a great deal of progress in that regard. And we have now begun actually getting to the point where we're almost close to 100% use of two-factor authentication for all of our administrator accounts across the federal government. It's ridiculous in some ways that it took that kind of crisis to move us, but sometimes you take advantage of what you can. But I think that it's clear that where we were was not adequate, but through the cyber sprint we have managed to raise the level across the board for non-administrators to 76% of federal accounts, and and that's an increase in just 2 months from 40%. So it's not a bad effort, but we still have a longer way to go. And we hope that we can leverage our experience with that to drive even greater changes in the way that we manage and do our cybersecurity across the federal government and employ even more effective technologies out there to improve our ability to protect those networks. And ultimately, to be a catalyst for the private sector to do that so that we do that across our entire economy. So that hopefully, my kids will ask me what the heck a password is, the same way they ask me what that rotary phone on at grandma's house is doing there, and why the TV won't respond to touch. I very much want to just say thank you to everyone here for all the hard work that you're doing, and I look forward to hearing a little bit of the discussion, and then I've actually got to head back to the White House very soon for a meeting with the Chief of Staff on some of the issues we've been talking about here. Again, just thank you for having me and letting me come and chat with you for a few minutes today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for putting today's conversation into context, why it's so important to do something fundamentally innovative in the area of authentication. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit, after a brief introduction of myself, is to introduce an organization to you that was formed in the last couple of years to address this problem. Very specific focus on the authentication problem, the password problem, and let you know where we're at. So my name is Brett McDowell. I'm Michael on the weekends. And I'm the Executive Director of the FIDO Alliance, and I'm here to tell you a little bit more about what we've been up to, and then we'll have a panel discussion about that. So first, the problem. We were formed to address this problem. Data breaches are out of control. Here are some statistics. There are many more. They get uglier year after year. Here from last year, 2014, nearly 800 data breaches in one study, with over 1 billion stolen records. In the past couple years, when it's really started to become generally aware in the press of just how bad the situation is, and we get coverage in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere else of these things. And one study where we looked at several breaches priced it at around $3.5 million. Other studies are in that ballpark per breach of what it costs the company to be a victim of one of these credential-centric attacks. So the root cause of this is really the password problem. Weak and poorly managed credentials. So what we need is a new model, a fundamentally new model that gets us away from passwords, and you have to understand what a password is before you can come up with a completely new technology to replace it. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the FIDO approach. So we call this Fast Identity Online, and if you have one thing that you take away today, this is an industry initiative with many companies and now government agencies in our membership collaborating, working together to address this problem. And the first word in FIDO is fast. So this is addressing the usability problem. Too many other security initiatives from industry have fallen short because they started with what can we do to make it more secure, and they ignored the usability problem. They ignored the user experience, and they ignored the deployment reality of bringing some of these technologies to a mass market. That's where we started. So a little bit about what our solution looks like. First, let's go back to the password. What's really wrong with passwords? Well, in tech speak, they're what's called a shared symmetric secret. So it's something that I know as a user, and I have to provide exactly that secret to the website or the online application. So here I am, a user, talking to a server directly, and it's a very vulnerable channel. There are a lot of attacks that we know of. There are phishing attacks. I can be socially engineered. I can be tricked, because all an adversary has to do to compromise this credential is get me to type it in. There are so many ways to get me to type it in. And the other way they can get these credentials very easily is to get me to download some malware that I didn't know about. And then they just watch everything I type in. So what we've done at FIDO to break this model in a fundamentally new and different way is we've introduced this idea of the FIDO authenticator. This gives us an abstraction layer so that we now can have 2 events to get that one job done, each of those events being optimized for what you need. So the first event is the user to the device. Now, by separating that, we can do user to device authentication in best of breed manner, such as something you just touch. You just look at it. Facial recognition, iris recognition. You just talk to it, voice. It just doesn't get any easier than the usability models that we're starting with. So a lot of biometric technology. Also, what you'll hear about today is our FIDO U2F, the second factor security key. It's already, you just put it in your device, it's there, you touch it. So a very simple, easy user experience on the first step. And now you've given permission to the device to act on your behalf and authenticate you online using asymmetric cryptography. So what is that? It's basically the nuts and bolts of online security that we've been living with for decades in the high security environments. And it's standed up to the test of time. It's what was introduced when people took a security-first approach to this problem, but packaged in a different way that was actually hard to use. FIDO has taken that same online cryptography technology, and we have packaged it in a very easy-to-use manner and a very deployable manner. So the key takeaway from the technology point of view is that FIDO is all about online authentication using public key cryptography. So a lot of people, when they hear about FIDO, new FIDO devices, they think FIDO is about biometrics. No, biometrics is one good way to have that first step interaction between the device and the user, but FIDO is an organization building technical standards that are about the conversation that the device has with the online website. We have two flavors of standards for two fundamental use cases. The first is complete password replacement, something we call UAF, Universal Authentication Framework. Step one, I'm challenged by the website to authenticate. Step two, I am challenged by my local device using whatever the best means is. So touch your fingerprint sensor. It could be a local pattern that you type into your phone. That gives the device permission to have the public key cryptography conversation and authenticate me online. The second set of use cases and the second set of standards we have are U2F, Universal Second Factor. This is where you're adding kind of a new and improved, or I would say a next generation second factor authentication to an existing password system. So you're already logged in with your username and password, and now instead of what's commonly used today as a one-time passcode, 6-digit code that you get through various means, because that passcode is still something you type in, it's not really optimized for the user experience, it's still vulnerable to some of those attacks that passwords are vulnerable to. So what we've done is we have the security key device, you touch it, and it does the cryptographic process for you and logs you in online. So I've touched on the usability of FIDO and the security of FIDO, but there's also a strong privacy story with the FIDO architecture. There's no third party in the protocol, so that means it's directly from the device to the website. There are no secrets stored on the server. So now, this is the real fundamental change when you get back to the original problem of data breaches. What was happening is people were getting these big data dumps of hashed passwords, breaking the hashes, and being able to reuse those password attacks because the secrets were all on the server. The only way to log in was to give the secret to the server so they could verify you knew the secret later. Now, with FIDO, there's no reason to have secrets on the server. The only thing we put there is what's called public keys. They're not secrets. If they're breached, they cannot be used against you in any other context. The next principle we have is if biometrics are used, like a fingerprint sensor or an iris scanner or facial recognition or voice recognition, that information never leaves the device. So you're not replacing the password breach with a biometric breach. Instead, all you're putting on the server again are public keys, and what's happening with your biometrics is stored and protected locally on your device. This is not scalable, and this will hit cybercrime right in the wallet. Much more expensive to go after people individually than to go after people with phishing and malware attacks. And there's no linkability provided, so there's no identifier that a website can use to track your behavior with FIDO. It's a very specific design principle that we had from the beginning. So we give nothing in our protocol to a website that can be used for tracking purposes. So in summary, what FIDO delivers is better security for online services, reduced cost for the enterprise, and it's simpler and safer for consumers. Open standards, everybody working together. Now let's talk about who are these companies that are working together on this solution. So we're an open trade association. Anyone can join the alliance from around the world. We have members from all over the world. Over 200 companies are now in the FIDO Alliance. And we're working together to solve this problem to create standards that meet the needs to remove our dependency on passwords. Here are the companies that are on our board of directors. Just to give you a flavor of who the industry leaders are, from operating system providers like Google and Microsoft, to major device manufacturers of Samsung and Lenovo, chip manufacturers, because to do this in the most secure way, you get right down into the chip, Intel, NXP, ARM. Financial services is a leading area where the better authentication is needed most. So you see we have several banks and banks from around the world, as well as almost all the payment companies. And then a lot of expert companies that you may not recognize, but they're leaders in the market on biometrics and enterprise security. Also, what we've done is expanded our collaboration from just industry leadership to also government leadership. And so recently we've created a new class of membership for government agencies to join, and we're off to a great start with government agencies from around the world, starting with the US and the UK and expanding into Europe and Asia. So now some updates. These are the companies that are actually using FIDO today to improve this problem, make life better for users, and make their systems more secure. PayPal, Alipay in China, and Google all deployed FIDO-based solutions in 2014. And in 2015, it's starting to get to be too much to even put on a slide. So we started with Microsoft committing to have Windows 10 be fully FIDO compliant. Qualcomm, which builds the insides of most of those Android devices you have, they're going to make it easier for all Android devices to support FIDO by putting it right in their chipset. Google took what they did in 2014 and made it available to their business customers. Anti-Docomo rolled it out across multiple devices in Japan. Dropbox and GitHub recently deployed the security key solution that was pioneered by Google. And Bank of America now is using FIDO for their fingerprint-based mobile banking app. All of these are enabled by FIDO-certified products. We now have over 30 companies with FIDO-certified products, over 60 different products that have been certified. So again, the leaders in their space from around the world, different markets, bringing FIDO to the marketplace so that they can start adding this as a solution and eventually deprecating the old password-based solutions. So my invitation, as I invite my panelists to come up and take their seats, is for those of you who are hearing this message for the first time, look into FIDO. There are a lot of things that are already deployed. There's a lot of technology you can use. Join the FIDO ecosystem and experience simpler, stronger authentication. Derek, I'm going to train you. This is the hot seat. So, first thing I want to do is let the panelists each introduce themselves, but I'm going to give you a question to answer as you do that. So you're here on the first panel of today, where we're really focused on what's FIDO doing, what's going on with this FIDO thing in the concept of two-factor authentication. So the question is, after you introduce yourself, what role do you play in your company when related to multi-factor authentication, and what is your role with FIDO? Stefan.
My name is Stefan Simoji. I am at Google. I work in security product management. My role with FIDO specifically is the chairman of the Privacy and Public Policy Working Group. And my role related to multi-factor authentication within the company is actually a varied one, but I'm involved in both the engineering and the product management side of the various solutions that we have.
First of all, Brett, it's great to be here today. I want to thank you for allowing us to participate. So my name's Mark Boroditsky. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Authentication at Twilio. Twilio entered the authentication business through the acquisition of a company that I was part of the leadership team called Authy. And Authy is specifically focused on delivering, as FIDO has defined, simple-to-use authentication solutions that have the ability to meet universal requirements. My role there with respect to FIDO is that we're very excited to get involved with FIDO. I think the mission is spot on, and we're excited about the momentum that we're seeing. I'll be participating as a member, hopefully in the foreseeable future.
Hello, my name is Derek Hansen. I am with Yubico. My role with Yubico is to provide the solution architecture, and which is really the big picture for how do these technologies that we are working with in the FIDO Alliance working today for enterprises and governments as well as consumers. My role within the FIDO Alliance is I sit within the working groups, actually helping try to get us to done and solve some of these problems and get out new specifications. So, yeah.
So, Stefan, let me start with you. So Google, if I'm not mistaken, actually coined the term two-step verification, which has really kind of caught on. But you've been a leader in multi-factor authentication for a long time. So you've deployed lots of different styles of two-factor authentication. What can you share with us in terms of lessons learned over the years of how users have responded to different modalities, what your experience has been with the security key and with the OTPs that you've offered in the past, and how that's working for you, and what can you share that others can learn from?
So to start off, passwords suck. just as a baseline. That's where we started, and we realized quite a few years ago that they were irrevocably broken. They're hostile to humans. Humans are not good at remembering hundreds and hundreds of passwords for all these different services that they use on an ongoing basis. And necessarily in today's world, you have lots of online relationships with lots of different companies. So how can we simplify that? That's what got us down the path that ultimately led to U2F. At the same time, that process had various milestones along the way, and it was well understood and has been well understood for a while that having a second authentication factor, and the term of art is two-factor authentication, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue unless you've had lots of practice. So that's where two-step verification came from. It was more humanist. It was trying to have the human who's supposed to use this stuff understand how it works. And we introduced Google Authenticator as a mechanism on the smartphone to issue you your little 6-digit numbers. There are other ways of getting the number. And the uptake hasn't been wildly enthusiastic because, again, it's not very human-friendly. People are really, really good at transcription errors. So by the time you fished your phone out, unlocked your phone, looked at the number, you try and type it, the first time you type it in, you're going to get it wrong. So you have to wait until the new number cycles around. This is not productive. It annoys the heck out of people. So we knew we had to come up with something better. And when we started thinking about that, we set the bar fairly high. What is it that we can do with the state of the art right now? Public key cryptography, as you said in your introductory remarks, was clearly at the cornerstone of our thinking, and that's how we wound up where we were.
Thank you. So, Mark, tell us a little bit more about Twilio and why you saw an opportunity to partner up with Authy, and what kind of opportunities and challenges you see in this marketplace come from your perspective around improving authentication.
Happy to. So partnering up with Twilio, or partnering up with Authy, was actually the reverse. Authy was actually a customer of Twilio. So the Authy solution was built on the Twilio platform. So for the SMS and voice-based authentication solutions that we deliver today, we built that utilizing the developer-oriented capabilities of Twilio. Gave us a very powerful solution with global capabilities. But like the evolution that my colleague from Google just laid out, that's sort of the earlier version of the way authentication was being pursued. As you start dealing with connectivity challenges and dealing with portions of the globe where users didn't necessarily want to get SMSs because of limitations with their devices, we recognized that it was necessary for us to deliver a solution that could actually be resident on a device and potentially operate independently. And that was the birth of the Authy app, which is sort of an upgraded version of the Google Authenticator, sort of our OTP solution, very broadly adopted by more than 10,000 websites today. But I do agree that it is, in some respects, limited. The notion of fishing it out, getting that code right, is really a tech-forward type of a solution. And where we are going, it's very similar to what's been laid out with the FIDO Alliance, and something that we think is a natural, which is to continue to exploit these powerful devices by hiding the interchange between the security server and the user, like you described earlier, Brett, so that we can deliver a one-touch experience, and that's the solution that we're releasing right now, that allows websites to move to a really simple interaction between the user and the service and accomplish the PKI-oriented security that you mentioned earlier. Opportunities in the market are boundless. It's actually shocking as we get into the customer base of Twilio and the broader marketplace that it's virtually all greenfield. So much of the applications and services that we use today are wholly unprotected, and the conversations that we're having with the more than 700,000 developers at Twilio are oftentimes the first time they're thinking about something beyond a password. So we got a lot of work to do, and the combination between Twilio and Authy affords us a wonderful opportunity to help those developers to provide better protection for their users.
Thanks, Mark. So, Derek, you've been on the pointy end of the spear with information security with a lot of different companies in your background, and you've had to deal with authentication from different perspectives. And now you're at a company that's really focused on this new security key model. So my question for you is there anything you can share from your history around challenges and perspectives on multi-factor authentication? And is there anything fundamentally different now rolling out security key as opposed to your other multi-factor authentication solutions in the past?
Absolutely. So the past and all of our experiences dealing with multi-factor authentication historically have been around some flavor of a one-time password. I send it to you in a text message, you have a token that's rolling over, you're looking at it, but all of these things are still subject to the same problems that they've always been. Additionally, when we've dealt with these systems, we've never given the user the choice. It's always been, if you want security or we require you to have security, this is what you will do. And what you're starting to see, especially as the FIDO Alliance gains strength and momentum in the marketplace, is that users are having a choice of how do they do an authentication with a U2F device. There are in the security keys that are available today, working today with your Google accounts and Dropbox accounts and GitHub, you can go out and start to protect yourself. And that same key can be used over and over again at other locations without a fear of privacy, without a fear of tracking, so that when you're dealing with this U2F device and this new FIDO compliant security key, what you have is a device that you keep with you, that you can use, and you get the choice of how is it that I want this device to function. There's a whole ecosystem of them. So that choice is very important to let you opt in and you demand of those consumer services that second factor to protect yourself.
So I'm going to follow-up question there. So what's a token necklace, and how does, because you're saying there's no more token necklace with the security key.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I do. So the first thing I will do is get out my keychain. This is my backup security key. I travel a lot of times, and that means that my devices may not be with me or may be out of batteries, so I have one on my keychain. This is also the same way that I can back up access to my wife's accounts, so that as a consumer, we can have access and get secured access to these systems. The security of these is paramount. And the beauty of this is I have one. I don't have to have a drawer full of 50 tokens or 5 different apps on my cell phone that let me authenticate. The one key that you can go and get today is able to be used everywhere that is FIDO compliant on the U2F protocol.
Thanks, Derek. So, Stefan, let's shifting gears a little bit in terms of what you've done in the past, and let's talk about future plans and the work that you're leading in the FIDO Alliance. How big of a challenge do you have dealing with the public policy sphere around authentication worldwide? And what is your game plan for bringing better, stronger authentication globally, especially working with governments?
So I'd say the biggest challenge is there's a very uneven amount of understanding and appreciation for the problem. There are lots of parts of the world that don't yet view this as an acute issue. They're perfectly happy with passwords. So overall, first of all, education. And fortunately and unfortunately, there are a lot of examples around breaches, around things that go wrong. So we don't lack for bad examples. Now we're beginning to have a lot of good examples. The slide that you showed earlier as far as the adoption curve, that's all extremely helpful. As we talk with governments specifically, they inevitably have e-government initiatives of their own, regardless of where you are in the world. Every government has at least 1 to 10. Beyond that, where does it make sense to actually deploy this sort of stuff? Where is it actually help? Where is it not a hindrance? And in most cases, the systems that they have to date, they are comparatively cumbersome. So we have the advantage of having something that's more usable. And right now, the technology is being very helpful to us. The rest is the human interaction, the education, and spreading the understanding of why this is actually a useful approach to the problem.
And how's that going?
So far, so good.
So, Mark, let me ask you, you talked about some really good adoption numbers that you've seen with the Authy app. What really works? What's the formula that works? And give us an example of a formula that doesn't work in introducing second factor authentication, whether it's in the consumer market.
Great question, by the way. It's much easier to describe what doesn't work, so I'm going to take the hard part first. So what we've experienced is as we get into the dialogue with major consumer applications, so these are organizations that have tens or hundreds of millions of users, that they take their user experience very seriously. Anything that potentially gets into the flow or the interaction with the user is a critical issue that could potentially get visibility all the way up to their C-level executives. Many C-level executives monitor their user experience because that's a very important part of their brand. So as we're having discussions with them, it's absolutely paramount that we eliminate the history in this category, as you described earlier, of the technology that was poorly architected, that really wasn't built for end users, and deliver an elegant and simple solution. Secondly, it has to work everywhere the user potentially is operating. And that's a user that may be traveling, or it may also be a user that's located in parts of the globe that have different types of devices and computing infrastructure. Our customers don't want to roll out a solution that only works for some of their users. It's actually very interesting, especially the community or sharing economy type organizations are absolutely adamant about the fact that they want one solution that works for all of their users so they don't end up with a segmentation of their community. They want the community to know that security is available to all of them. So having something that works equally well in Indonesia and Bahrain as it does in Palo Alto, that's difficult. So having a solution that actually potentially delivers a range of options, something that will still work with a feature phone that maybe today we wouldn't see in the US, but is still very popular in parts of the emerging economies. And then lastly, a solution that's actually extremely developer and application friendly. Because at the end of the day, the decision that's being made starts with and ends with the developer. And this is something that I've learned extremely well from Twilio. The adoption that's possible if you're actually gaining the hearts and minds of the development community is very powerful. So we deliver a solution that for them literally is a few lines of code to be able to enable the application. And we make it possible for them to get very powerful capabilities behind those few lines of code so that they don't have to worry about the evolving set of requirements and threats that are out in the marketplace, and they can rely on the fact that we're delivering against that. Now, where it doesn't work well is when the solution is complicated for the user, and you're ending up spending a lot of time with support organizations dealing with locked out users, which, by the way, is probably the biggest threat to the success of this category. Delivering a solution that can deal with the reality that users are going to make mistakes. Users are going to misplace a device. They're going to have a broken device. And having something that's going to be able to easily and securely move from that experience back to access without having to call the help desk is critical. So we built into our solutions the capability to trust a set of devices independently through self-service, and we've made it possible for the user to recover very easily when that inevitable event occurs. So our customers that enable our solution on their services don't end up with a new source of dissatisfaction amongst their users and obviously unnecessary help desk cost.
No, thanks, Mark, because you make an interesting point. I was emphasizing the importance of making authentication easy for the end user to authenticate into a site. But you've raised another dimension, which is if you're going to deliver a solution to the marketplace to try to make a difference at scale, you have to make sure that it's easy for that website application developer to add this authentication mechanism to their website, or that mobile app developer to add this new authentication mechanism. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
I wouldn't trivialize that. I mean, in my prior roles in organizations like Oracle and PastLogix, people ignored the developer. And the new generation of applications, they're driving the cycles. And if you can get, again, their hearts and minds, the potential is limitless.
So, Derek, because I know you, I know a little bit about your background. Do you think that, does strong authentication online matter to a company like Costco or automotive industry, General Motors, Ford? Is this on their radar? Where does this apply to companies like that?
So without speaking directly for those companies, all of those organizations are absolutely aware of the risks of not solving this problem correctly. It's been on magazine articles and print all over the place that there are issues with the security of things in your cars, in your homes, and everything that gets connected, everything that you interface with a machine on has some sort of security and identity aspect to it. So there are very focused on what is a simple, secure method for dealing with authentication. And that's actually where the protocols, and when you spoke about public key cryptography, really matter, is because if you can build a system that is able to be used in the field, in your car, in your home, but the user doesn't know all of the complexity behind it, you've changed the equation right now. Every home router that somebody goes out and buys comes with the same default password. If that equation is starting to be able to be changed so that I can't just sign into my neighbor's Wi-Fi because he hasn't ever changed it, those things are going to start protecting all of us and going to start removing the risk of how we do that. And the companies like Costco and like Ford and GM, which you spoke of, are very aware of what they do and how it impacts their customers. What you are going to see in the future is security as a differentiator. If I give you a better, more protected environment for you to work with me, that is actually going to be something that people will start to look at. My 2 kids that are under the age of 5 have both had their identity stolen multiple times because of this problem. So are we going to fix that, or are we going to end up giving a point where the consumer's like, I'm sick and tired of this, I'm going to go over to another company? And I do believe that you will start to see in the next several years that frustration in the consumer and the security offering actually become a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that. That's actually a really, really good point, Derek. And it's something that I'm very frustrated about, and I think it's actually something that the market's going to start to recognize. And that is, as you look at the evolving sort of sharing economy, and we work with a lot of the big sharing economy companies, they're really relying on the end of the day with the fact that it can establish trust. You're going to share your house, you're going to share your car, you're going to share something that's important and sensitive to you. Trust has to be there that the system and service that you're working with is not going to end up causing you harm. We're working with a number of the big IoT companies. And if you think about it, the risks that are potentially there, not only with automobiles, but the entire infrastructure that's running big parts of industry and big parts of our daily lives are at risk. And there is a possibility that if we don't get this right, we may get to some sort of logical plateau where consumers sort of pull back. They sort of say, you know what, I'll do my online research, but I'm not going to put my mortgage application online. You know, I'll do my shopping because my credit card's protected, but you know what, I draw the line at healthcare. I actually want to go to the doctor's office, fill in a form, have them worry about the security. I don't want to be exposed. If we don't get this right, trust is in jeopardy, and the result could be a challenge for some of the potential that we're all working on as we look at the greenfield that's still ahead of us with respect to what's possible with the internet.
So it's an interesting direction you're going there. It's like, worst case scenario outcome. So let me go back to Stefan. I'm going to ask you, do you think that there ever will be, I won't ask you whether there should be, but will there ever will be any sort of public policy mandates about stronger authentication that's holding people accountable to avoid this worst case scenario? Because it's getting pretty bad already with all of the breaches that we've had. But do you think we're going to see in this country, or maybe anywhere else you want to speak to, public policy mandates, maybe on classes of services, that you have to roll out strong authentication?
My prognostication skills are imperfect. So I'd be much happier if the question were, should there be?
Okay. I'll revise. Friendly
absolutely. There absolutely should be. The danger is always, and the temptation is also frequently great to specify a technology. And generally and over broadly speaking, any regulation that's been successful in this space has specified the outcome and the end goal. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen. There needs to be an assurance for the consumer, the assurance for the business. It needs to be bilateral. There needs to be something that a developer can build on, because they tend to have a much longer event horizon before they see the fruits of their efforts. So there's absolutely a need for some very clear statements and some very clear guidelines for what is the best practice. And adoption of best practices ideally would start with governments, to lead by example, to actually show that this is how it's done. In reality, it tends to be commerce first. It tends to be entrepreneurs. It tends to be people who are seeing gaps in the market. But at that point, it's also, broadly speaking, government's responsibility to see what's going on and say, look, this is the best practice right now. Let us not merely embrace it, but let's enthusiastically support it as well. So whether there will be, I think it's inevitable that there probably will be some regulation somewhere that requires some form of strong authentication. But the important thing is that they focus on the outcome rather than this is how you have to do it, because technology moves just far too quickly. And we've even seen in the history of FIDO, our specifications evolve with the technology. We move forward. I don't want to be locked into our own specification from a year ago, say. I don't want that to happen in the outside world either.
So quick follow-up. Do you think FIDO Alliance has a role to play with helping these public policy outcomes realize?
Absolutely, because we're in a position as a consortium of companies to provide as neutral a set of experiences based on the stuff that our member companies have actually achieved, and we can go and provide the education and provide the actual context. It's not this hypothetical pie-in-the-sky stuff. It's we actually did this. Various companies, again, as your chart showed, have actually rolled this out. So, the Chrome user population today out in the world is 750 million plus people. Every current copy of Chrome has the necessary support built into it. So in terms of the infrastructure out there, and when we flipped the switch last October, all consumer accounts at Google can now support a FIDO standard mechanism of authentication. We added the enterprise support in April. So we've gone ahead and done this. And we've been running all of this stuff internally for quite some time previously. So we took all the teething pain in advance internally. And there was some teething pain. Any new technology is going to have some trouble. But the stuff that we have today is remarkably mature. It works really well. And we can actually show it off as this is real rather than this is just merely the hypothetical, potentially vaporous future.
So we're all in agreement, of course. This is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're talking about strong authentication, Two-Factor Tuesday. We think every service should have two-factor authentication as an option, or strong authentication of some modality, and we believe that every user should turn it on. So, starting with you, Derek, and working our way down the line, what is the biggest challenge that you have in the hat you wear in this effort to achieving that outcome?
The biggest challenge that I personally face is making sure that people understand that they can start today. They think that this is stuff that is out there, that it may someday become something I can use, but it is there today, and it is something that can be used by anyone from my grandma all the way through people that are extremely technical. The idea that we can't do anything to improve our own situation is a big challenge. The other flip side to that is corporations that I talk to are often scared of the effort to put in to deal with adding these capabilities. As somebody who's helped a lot of corporations do this, it's not nearly as bad as you think. We can do this. These are solvable problems, and there's a whole alliance of companies like you who can walk you through their lessons learned so that it is not painful for you. Ultimately being that we build a more secure internet for everyone. The goal of Yubico and the subtitle under our name is to trust the net. And the idea of that is that we've established enough of a foundation that you can begin to trust what is going on out there. And we have a long road to climb to reestablish that trust.
I would actually echo just about everything that Derek said, sorry, and just add one level more, and that is that it's inertia. The major challenge that when we're talking to major organizations about adoption is that they do have a list of reasons why not to adopt. And I think that list is becoming weaker and weaker for the reasons that Derek outlined. There are solutions that work, that scale, that are easy to use, easy to implement. It's almost they've got excuses because they've got other priorities. I fear that we'll end up in a situation where they're going to get mandated, and that's not going to necessarily be the best scenario, because I still think we're a ways off from the technology that's going to be able to address the broadest cross-section of potential down the road. I'd like to see a continuing sort of open, innovative environment to see those potential solutions get developed. I also fear that we're going to see a reaction of liability, that where sites didn't take steps to protect their users, the users had their data jeopardized or somehow or another breached. They ended up with consequences, and the site's terms of service said, well, the password was your responsibility, and clearly you didn't take care of it, so it's not our fault. But I suspect that at some point that terms of service is not going to be a sufficient point of defense, and there'll be some smart, crafty lawyer that turns around and turns that into a new category of litigation. And then we're going to see this turnaround of organizations in reaction. And again, we may not be solving the problem as best we could. So what I would hope is that this issue gets to the visibility of the major decision makers so that they recognize that they have an opportunity now to fix the problem proactively and implement a good solution.
Right. So I'm going to edit slightly because where we are on time, Stefan, and ask you to answer. We've heard about what some of the big challenges are to getting to this state of stronger authentication. What is providing uplift? What gives you hope? What's the thing that says, you know what, I think we're going to get there now?
Because this stuff works. If we didn't have the proof, if this were all vaporous, if this were all coming next year and perpetually coming next year for a sequence of 5 to 10 years, then we'd be in a much weaker position. What we're seeing now is it works. It works for users. It works for developers. As you pointed out, neither Dropbox nor GitHub are FIDO Alliance members, yet they're extremely visible implementers of this stuff. We saw on Twitter last week, WordPress said that they intend in their next major release come next February to integrate U2F as well. So we know this stuff works. It's proven. That's what gives me hope, because all the theory in the world is for naught if you don't have actual empirical proof.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking the panel for their time today.
Great, thank you. That was a great panel. Thank you, Brett. I'm going to ask my other panel to come up now. Come up, take a seat. Great. Turn your microphones. To all of you, again, online, thank you for joining us here in the room. We really thank you for being here as well. We'll just go right down and, first I'll just ask you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll just jump right in and have a discussion about this. So,
I'm Sean Brooks. I'm a privacy engineer at the National Institute for Standards and Technology.
Jack Seuss. I'm Vice President of IT at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
And I'm a substitute. I'm Eric Durr. I work on the identity team at Microsoft.
Great. So actually this panel, a little different. We have some representation here. We have industry, we have academia, and we have government. So in my mind, that represents, kind of the partnerships in the way that NCSA works a lot, having a lot of different players on the table. I think when we talk about the internet as an ecosystem, we have different members of that ecosystem here this afternoon to talk. So I'm just going to start on the education community. Jack, I guess you've been working on the two-factor adoption in higher education. What are the barriers in that space? And what are the efforts underway to make it more smooth?
Well, I think that one of the things that has been a big barrier in higher education has been the fact that most universities end up having anywhere from 100 to 500 enterprise applications that they're trying to integrate into a coherent authentication strategy. And so as you begin to look at authentication and second factor, one of the things that we've had to think about is how are we really going to manage this when so many of our services are also becoming software as a service and moving to the cloud. And one of the things that I really want to give a shout out to is NIST. One of the things, and I know Jeremy was here earlier, but we in the higher ed community had received a grant from as part of the NSTIC activity, and we created this group called the Multi-Factor Consortium. A cohort, this was a group of 50 schools that really started to tackle the problems of how can we deploy multi-factor across higher ed. And what we ended up doing is coming up with ways to integrate a multiple number of solutions against our single sign-on technology that we've developed in the higher ed space and is used in our federation. That's allowed us over the last year to see deployment dramatically increase. And I'll talk more about it later.
Yeah, so I guess consortium is going to be on a spelling bee for some of you later, so you might want to ask how to spell it. I'll give you a hint later, maybe. Sean, you come from the government side, and you mentioned NIST. So, and you work in the privacy space as well, which I think is really important here. Brett talked about that a little bit earlier. So, what are the privacy implications of authentication technologies, or the ones that are at least emerging now?
So I think there's two really important elements of that. One is that a lot of the assumptions that individuals make about how they interact with the system and where is the privacy stuff that I have to be worried about when I go to a system, a lot of that happens after authentication, or at least used to happen after authentication. Now, as we see the market migrate towards and government migrate towards stronger authentication technologies, we're seeing the use of more private information being used as an authentication mechanism. So biometrics, knowledge-based authentication, there's a lot of different very interesting applications that require personal information or some instantiation of private information to enable authentication. And so organizations are having to do a lot more thinking about what type of risks they're taking on by enabling different authentication mechanisms. And I think some of the privacy enhancing technologies that are enabling the use of things like biometric information in a privacy enhancing manner is really exciting, because that kind of relieves some of the concerns about the use of biometrics or the use of these more more private information to enable authentication. One of the other key issues is that the point of authentication in systems where individuals run into authentication is transversing from one system to another, or enabling the release of some information. And a lot of those places are where you would see sort of classic notice and consent opportunities for organizations to get that kind of consent about the use of information from individuals. And that's because that's a point of contextual change. And that's where sort of privacy risks arise. And a lot of organizations now, as authentication becomes a lot smoother, are going to have to think very differently about how they're addressing new privacy risks and new contexts when, for example, they're dealing with a device in the Internet of Things with almost no user interface and no opportunity to get that kind of classic notice and consent.
All right, we'll come back to that kind of challenge, I think, in a little bit. But let's go down to Eric. I think, Eric, you want to just talk just sort of generally about sort of Microsoft's approach to two-factor authentication, both maybe in the past, also looking today and in the future. Brett raised a little bit earlier that Windows 10 obviously has some changes in it that are around this issue, and what does that all mean for us?
Sure, happy to. So we've been working on two-factor or two-step verification in various forms for quite a while, like most of the people in the FIDO Alliance, like people here today. And like many people, we started as kind of an enthusiast play. You say there's people who are more security-minded, let's give them a set of tools to protect themselves. And that has been relatively effective in that context. I think the thing that we're trying to do together with the folks in FIDO is figure out how, if you think about the world population in kind of a bell curve, a rough bell curve. So we've gotten, a few percent at one side. And, the question is, how do we get to the middle, let alone all the way to the other end, to the extreme? And even if as I say that, I should overlay, I really think that that there's two dimensions. There's the dimension of consumers choosing for themselves how they want to be protected, where they have some relationship with a set of services around the world. There's a whole other dimension, which is organizations and how they choose to protect themselves and their employees. And I think that the challenges are the same, because the challenge is always about legacy. You know, you have a bunch of devices in your life, you have a bunch of applications in your organization, and you shouldn't, it's not a small decision to just walk away from a set of those things, and yet to really be truly secure for a thing that wasn't designed to be secure and usable is quite challenging. So it creates these constraints that are challenging. But the thing that's different with an organization in my mind versus a consumer is that anybody running an organization today that isn't moving towards strong authentication as rapidly as they humanly can, frankly, it's criminal. I mean, it's just the number of attacks out there are out of control. And this is an important point. I mean, for everything that you've seen in the media, most of my history where I've been close to some media situation, it seems commonplace that the media kind of makes a bigger deal out of the thing than it really is. And that's kind of the nature of the game. But the inverse is true in the world of criminal attack and cybersecurity. My view is that there's far less written about what is actually happening than is actually happening. As scary as what's written, it's far scarier in truth what's actually happening with, you know, criminals and governments and all that kind of stuff. And so you know, what we've learned a lot from the early experiments we've done around two-step verification and stronger authentication in various forms. And now with the FIDO Alliance, we're really focused on how do we make that mainstream and how do we make it even better, how do we make it more usable. And you know, part of that is by doing things like supporting some of these new standards in Windows 10 so that it just comes with the devices that you have. And I think that's long-term the only scalable solution to get mainstream, is to have all the major devices in the world just support a common set of standards. And then over time, you can shift more and more usage onto those devices and truly protect people without this crazy trade-off of usability that sometimes happens with the tools you have today in a very complicated environment.
Great. So, you know, we'll go back to you, Jack, here to talk a little bit about this idea of the consortium. By the way, I have it spelled here as capital C, small o, capital H, ORTIOUM. And I can't use it in a sentence, so I guess I can't use it as a spelling bee yet. But so talk about this a little bit more and how you've been using that to, to promulgate deployment and some of the lessons learned that you have from this consortium of people working together.
Well, I think that what we really saw through this was that we built some software that would work with our higher ed federation. And we built in software that now allows us to have multi-factor. And it's broad-based. You can use just about any multi-factor. One of the other things that we really came away with this is, as a group, we joined together and we started working with our federation around some buying decisions. And so we were working with a number of vendors who were offering great prices. I mean, one of the challenges that used to be there at the enterprise, especially for universities, was you were looking at $15 to $20 a token a few years ago. We've been able to change that dynamic dramatically and go to site licensing, where you're talking about $5,000 or $10,000 an institution. By changing the pricing, we've really been able to move this in a way that now you can deploy it broadly, and you don't have this same sort of cost structure that was hanging over your head as to, is this going to work? Can you deploy it before it becomes obsolete? So those two things, building in a software infrastructure to make it work, changing the pricing dynamic by having multiple universities come together to sort of support a broader buying base, have really been two things that have allowed it to take off. The third thing that we did was, and it goes back to the last panel, it's got to be easy. And so one of the things that we have seen broad-based deployment take off for is many campuses have used a product that just leverages your phone. And it leverages your phone in a very simple way where your phone becomes the second token. It could text you a one-time password, but for most devices, Android, iOS, there's an app for it. And so it just pops up on your screen and you say approve, click the button. We have been able to design this in a way that when we've deployed it on campuses, whether it's clerks, accountants, students, no one is having a problem using this technology. And so simple really is key when you're beginning to deploy second factor. You've got to make it easy, and you've got to make it in such a way that it's not inconvenient to the user experience.
That's great. So just, I think dovetails right back to the government here too, a little bit about, the efforts that, that the government has underway to encourage the adoption of these stronger authentication technologies. So you want to talk a little bit about what's going on the government side in this area?
Sure, I can talk about the work on multi-factor authentication within NIST fits into sort of a much broader portfolio on what we're doing on identity. And that includes the NSTIC program, that includes some recent activity in the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. There's a lot of work being done at NIST to sort of tackle a lot of the issues that were recognized years ago when the president first signed the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. In terms of directly dealing with the challenges of authentication, one of the things that has been sort of a stalwart part of the NSTIC program, which Jack mentioned earlier, is the pilot program. We've had 15 pilots, and we just awarded $3.7 million to 3 new pilots this year, all trying to bring new solutions to the table in the marketplace for online identity technologies. And a number of them have directly addressed sort of market gaps in online authentication. The vast majority of them have had very interesting deployments of multi-factor solutions. And I think between the new technologies we're seeing brought to the marketplace broadly and some of these innovative techniques that we're seeing both in terms of the using unique authentication techniques, proofing techniques, we're really starting to see the stimulation of what we refer to as the identity ecosystem really start to move towards a future that the NSTIC envisioned years ago, which is a much more privacy-enhancing, much more secure, easy-to-use, and interoperable online space. Beyond the NSTIC pilot program, there's a number of things that that NIST and our partners in the federal government have done to encourage the federal government to sort of eat its own dog food. The shared service connect.gov, which is a way for federal agencies to enable sort of easier access to government services online with their constituents, has requirements in it about ways to implement multi-factor authentication. We're seeing NIST Guidance 863, which is the NIST guidance for federal agencies about authentication technologies. We're revising that right now to bring it more into line with modern expectations of how to instantiate authentication technologies within federal information systems. Furthermore, there's a lot of work going on in the NSTIC office around sort of the strength of identity, all of that tied into, as you're proving identities and using strong identities and systems, you have to have a fundamental baseline of privacy enhancing and security enhancing technologies. And authentication really is the doorway to that in information systems. And so you can't have more trusted identities online, you can't have more privacy and security enhancing systems if you don't have this sort of basic level of authentication security solved.
So at the National Cybersecurity Alliance, our job is to make this easy for people, right? To simplify all this for how we talk to people. And so I'll throw this out to all of you really, but you can answer it from your various perspectives. But just thinking about this, and to you, Sean, as I hear you talking too, I think one of the things is there's a difference between identity and authentication, and sometimes I think in the consumer's mind, that can all get wrapped around the axles. Like, what are you guys talking about, right? How do we start to, and Jack, and Eric, both of you, from a slightly different perspective, maybe the more consumer end and the student end, how do we start to simplify and talk about this in a way that educates people and makes that pathway to adoption a little bit easier? Or maybe you have some examples of how you've done it, and that would be great too.
You want to go?
Sure, I guess I'll start. I'm going to say something contrarian.
Please.
In a way, I think with the average consumer, you don't talk about it. I think you just do it. And I'll give a very concrete example of stepping in this direction. Banks more and more are starting to require various challenges in various circumstances. This is effectively multi-factor authentication. But the bank doesn't say to you, hold on, here's a big thing, it's a new thing, you should be scared, you should freak out. The bank just says, hey, I see you're on a new device. Let's check your birth date, or let's send you a code to your phone on file, or whatever. Now, banks, it's a little easier on one dimension because they're highly regulated, on the other dimension because they start by spending time face-to-face with a customer, they collect a lot of information, they have a high margin business where they can afford to add other things into that flow to increase the certainty of who that customer is. But, you know, everybody uses online banks these days, and I don't hear an outcry of how hard it is. And so I think that they're onto something there. And I think that if industry can come together and just say, look, in a coordinated fashion, we're going to make a push towards a set of these techniques. And of course, we're going to focus on making them as simple as possible. And of course, new advancements in technology and, wearables and bio and all these things can both be more secure and more simple for customers. But I think that you can just kind of start to make some real progress.
So a little bit like the frog in the water and just raising the temperature a little bit each time?
Perhaps.
So I want to echo on what he said. Is I think that some of our problem had been, and I love what NIST has done, and I love where the NSTIC is going, but I think some of the early NIST documentation around 863, we got our heads wrapped around what the entropy rate is going to be, and how do we model this in second factor, and is it really truly silver or bronze, and we were spending a lot of time looking for perfect when better would have just been a huge leap. And to what you were saying, I mean, as we have deployed Duo, one of the options that we do in second factor is we're really aiming at two risks. We're aiming at phishing and people who might have a machine compromised with a keylogger so their password has then been taken over. And what we really want to be able to do is make sure that someone who has compromised someone else's password can't log in as them. And so the way that our second factor model is working is anytime a new device is trying to connect in as that user, it requires the second factor. And if you've already logged in from that particular device, you may not have to use your second factor for a week. It's just automatically allowing you to log in. We have been able to dramatically reduce, the problems that we see by deploying this, and it hasn't really impeded users. They're just seeing it on an occasional time from the same devices they're logging into. However, if they go to an internet cafe or they go to some other place, yes, they're having to use it whenever they're doing that, but we should expect them to have to do that because you can't trust those devices. And I think that's been the key, has really been tying this to risk and making it as easy as possible to deploy.
So Jack set me up on my absolutely just teed off exactly what I was going to say, which is that a lot of the ways that institutions, whether in the private or the public sector, have communicated to individuals about the importance of using one technology or another has been very flawed, particularly in the cybersecurity and privacy space for a long time, because it talks about the benefits of, oh, you should use these technologies, or, oh, here's our privacy policy, and this is a set of rules that you should understand about sort of how we govern your privacy. And, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not people understand these things or whether or not people care about these things, but there's no debate that people understand and they care about risks. And this isn't risks like someone's going to break into your system and steal your information. These are risks like, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to lose money. You're going to be embarrassed. You're going to be stigmatized in your community. There are real risks as our lives have become increasingly brought online, and those risks people understand. And one of the big things that we've been working on in the NIST privacy engineering work is trying to figure out how organizations can really identify, what are the problems that actual people experience as a result of information systems processing their personal information. And when you can effectively articulate those risks, people understand that. And then when you say, well, hey, here's a thing that you can do that helps prevent those risks, people understand why that is important. That all said, going back to your point earlier about there's some things that we should just do, was at the Global Identity Summit in Tampa recently, and Jennifer Lynch from the Electronic Frontier Foundation we were talking about sort of building more flexible approaches to privacy and building sort of risk-based approaches to privacy. And Jennifer said something that I thought was really compelling, which was that, it's great to do that and to build protections for security and privacy that address specific risks, but you have to have a baseline of fundamental security and privacy in a system in order to engender the amount of trust that it requires for users to make actual decisions about what to do with their information or who has permission to access that information. So a lot of what we've tried to encourage in our sort of risk-oriented work at NIST is helping organizations look and say, all right, what are the risks? How do you communicate those risks? And what can you actually implement on the technical side to resolve that risk before you sort of say, well, maybe we should just get their consent to mitigate that risk. And a lot of strong authentication technologies are technical controls that organizations can institute now that start to provide that baseline floor of trust in order to sort of level up the amount of the decisions that individuals can actually make about how to protect their information.
You want to add something to that, or?
No, I agree.
Okay. Can you give a sort of like more real world example of that I think would be helpful? I mean, that's part of, like how does that actually work for people?
Sure. Let's talk about how an organization chooses an authentication technology. With biometric authentication technologies, there's a lot of different offerings out there for whether or not you should have local proofing of the biometric on the device, or whether or not you should have a biometric template stored in the cloud, and you send the biometric information up into the cloud, you do all the processing in the cloud, and then you send the sort of yes/no for the authentication back to the device. There's a lot of questions out there, and there's some debate about, what is better, one or the other. And when you take a risk-based approach to that, you can basically say, well, what's better for your use case? If you've got a very high security, high assurance use case where you don't want any information stored on the device and you want to keep everything really, really tight and really, really secure at the institution or at the cloud, maybe your remote proofing is okay for you. But for a lot of, I would probably say most instances, creating a giant repository of biometric information, even if it's just templates, in the cloud may not address the risks you're trying to prevent by having a more advanced authentication technique. And so keeping that biometric information on the device makes the risk that your institution is taking on much lower, and it also gives individuals a greater sense of control and capacity. I mean, so I lose my wallet. I know that there are things that I have to do to reclaim my information, and I'm responsible for keeping my wallet around, and that's okay. I lose my phone, and it's got some biometric information stored on it. I understand that, look, there's some stuff that I have to do in order to preserve my privacy and preserve the security of my information. And but if all of a sudden, I get news from a service provider that, their cloud storage has been breached and my fingerprint information is now out there in the wild and there's really nothing I can do about it, and here's some free credit monitoring service, that would never happen. I may not feel like the risk to me has been mitigated. And so you have to sort of take a look at sort of what is your institutional posture, what are your organization's needs, what are the particular risks you're trying to mitigate, and then make the choice about the type of authentication technology that you implement and see if that actually mitigates the particular risk.
I just add a quick point. I agree with the framework you articulated 100%. I have a slightly stronger viewpoint on bio and thoughts of local versus cloud, and it's quite simple. Look, and by bio, I really mean the common pragmatic stuff, iris, thumbprint, the stuff that's available today. There's a bunch of stuff a little more on the horizon that starts to be a little different. But, the problem, unlike a password for all of its flaws, if you have a password in some service and it gets compromised, you can change your password. If your fingerprint gets compromised, it's not very easy to change your fingerprint. And so it's unlike passwords where one bad company or one irresponsible company can really screw things up for customers forever. And so I actually think our point of view, certainly as a company, and I think in FIDO as well, is bio has a great role as on a local device, and bio in the cloud is a no-no. And I know there's debate on that still, but we at least have a firm point of view on that.
I was just going to add that I think 2 years from now, what's really going to be key is giving users choice, even at the enterprise level, where there's going to be a multitude of multi-factor solutions, and people will be choosing what best fits their personal requirements and their own opinion. And I know a lot of people would be very concerned about doing biometric. They may be less concerned about doing some of the other device-based. We should be, and others will be just the opposite. They want ease of use to be as simple as possible. We should be offering people choice as we start to go forward. And I think that will help us a lot if we can start to think that way.
Well, that kind of dovetails into my last question, because I think, when you hear all the presentations so far today, when Brett was showing, where FIDO's headed, there's obviously this upward trajectory that we're headed on, which is great. And I think we're a lot farther now than we were even a year ago, 18 months ago, or 2 years ago, both in the public knowledge about this and the availability. I have the Yubico key that I use on my Gmail, those kinds of things. They're more readily available. But we're still in kind of a transitional phase here, right? I mean, we're kind of on our way somewhere, but we're not there yet, and that's what kind of you were alluding to. So what happens, let's say, over this period, and how do we transition to the period, and what do we need to do during this period to set the right foundation? And I'll ask not only from the network side, but this is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're very interested in the consumer side. How do we get them to be more accepting as these things come out? I mean, you gave one technique earlier, but maybe there are others. And we'll close off with that. You can give some thought to that.
Well, I think the key thing that we have to start talking about is doing events like this. This is great. We have to raise awareness that two-factor is not for IT geeks. It's for everyone, and that it's easy to use, and it helps really protect you much more than a password does. And I think simple messaging and showing that it's easy is going to be key.
I agree with that. I'd build and say, I think that what's been great to see over the last couple of years is that many companies who historically have competed on a number of fronts have chosen to say that helping secure our customers is a place we're just going to cooperate and set the competition aside, focus on building things together. And I think the more we can do that and the more we can learn from each other as we go out and experiment with different techniques, I think that's the fastest road to adoption. And I see that happening more and more every day.
And I mean, building off what you were saying earlier, to a certain extent, it's organizations just have to start doing this. And what happens then is not just, you're protecting your organization and you're preventing risks and you're protecting customers or citizens. You're building momentum for an expectation that this exists in the marketplace. I was at a family event a couple of weeks ago and was talking to a cousin of mine, and he was talking about how, I don't remember what the service was, but it was a fairly frivolous online service wanted him to do a multi-step authentication mechanism. And he said, yeah, and I'm seeing this all the time, and why isn't my bank doing this? And, that kind of expectation. I mean, people understand the risks that are out there to them. And if you can articulate what the risks are with using your service and how enabling a second factor or enabling an advanced authentication technique can help prevent those risks, people will adopt because they want to protect their information. They want to protect their activities online. They want to use online services. And so enabling that baseline floor of trust, enabling people's expectation to be realized. We in the NIST office, worked on a Civic Day of Hacking event where we were able to help, create more transparency and knowledge about what services are using multi-factor authentication technologies now, and creating ways for individuals to demand this from other service providers. I mean, building that expectation that this should be there when you have to authenticate to a service is really, I think, the best thing that can build more momentum.
Can I just touch quickly? I think you raised a powerful point, and it reminds me literally on the Uber from the airport to my hotel last night. The Uber driver, we were chit-chatting, and he asked what I did. And I said, I worked at Microsoft. He said, what are you in town for? And I said, and what do you work on? And I said, look, it's really a boring story. Like, it's the greatest job ever, but it's not the kind of job that you want to tell people at cocktail parties. It's just, it's not interesting. He says, come on, tell me what you do. And so I told him we're here for a conference and working on getting rid of passwords. And the Uber driver says, that's great. Like, I've been reading all about biometrics and all this hacking. And so, there's a proof point that, it is seeping into society. And I think you're totally right that the more it does that, the easier it is to change customer behavior and get to where we need to get.
Well, this is great, and just so everybody knows, during October, we're always asked to give that basic advice to everybody to how to stay safe online. And we've really, the last 2 years, our motto has been telling people, get 2 steps ahead. That's what we've been saying. Get 2 steps ahead, turn it on. I mean, hopefully we'll be at the point where they won't have to bother to turn it on, and that's sort of hopefully, where we'll be a little bit further down the line. But we're just telling people that's what you can do, and I think it speaks to a lot of what you all said here today. So let's thank our panel. Thank you very much. This is terrific. And now, as you guys are, I'm going to make one last introduction. You can go ahead and sit down. That's all right. It's really my pleasure to introduce Charles McColgan from Telesign. He's going to talk a little bit about the Turn It On campaign. And let me just tell you that this has been a really important campaign in our effort as we've gone around the country. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Charles take it over and tell us about what you're up to.
Thank you, Michael. So, hi, I'm Charles McColgan, the CTO of Telesign. Just to tell you a little bit, because you probably never heard of who Telesign is, we're kind of the company behind the scenes. We power 9 of the 10 largest web properties, and we help them fight fraud, and we help them keep their users secure. And so the way we specifically do this is we help them when they set up new accounts at account registration, keeping registration fraud down. We also help power a lot of 2-factor authentication via voice and mobile text and via push notifications to help with account access and usage. And then very importantly, we help with account recovery. So in account recovery, one of the problems people have today is that they'll get their credentials stolen, and then the trust anchor might be their mailbox. And now all of a sudden, the trust anchor of your account is your mailbox, and you can't get into there. And so we help people recover their account using 2-factor authentication. So, why are we here today? We're here today because there's this huge threat landscape. Everyone's read in the news about major retailers getting compromised, about social networks getting compromised. People themselves have seen credit cards stolen, and consumers are really, really concerned. And while Telesign, we don't deal directly with consumers. Consumers are who we're trying to help. And so what we did is we decided to do a consumer survey. We went out there and we surveyed 2,000 adults in the US and the UK. And we asked them, how are you doing? We made sure that they at least have to have a mobile phone and an online account, but how are they doing online? And what we found out was that they're very concerned. 80% of them said that they were worried, and it was a little split. They were a little more worried in the US than they are in the UK, but they're very concerned. And when we ask those same consumers, what are they concerned about? They're concerned about hacking, and it's almost all of them are concerned about hacking. 96% are concerned about getting their accounts hacked. And what's the reason why they're concerned about that is they're actually speaking from experience. So 40% of those people said that they have experienced a security incident in the last year. And that might be that somebody got into their mailbox, somebody got into their social media. Very likely it means someone stole their credit card. And when you have people who are concerned, they're concerned about hacking, and that happens to them, you've got people who are very worried. And why is this such a big problem? It's what we call sort of the domino effect, in that on average, consumers have 24 password-protected online accounts. Now, this is in a survey, and people said, how many do I have? And they said 24. I know myself, I did a survey of this, I have over 300. And so people have a lot of online accounts. And on average, for those 24 accounts, they only have 6 passwords. So if one of those passwords gets compromised, if you, a consumer, if you use that password in some account, it gets compromised, the hacker's going to take that. They probably have your email address. They're going to go then try to log into your email and see where they can get from there. And this domino effect it happens all the time. So, and with the account hacks that have gone on, people aren't changing their passwords. So it could be that this hack didn't even happen this week. Maybe it happened 6 months ago. Maybe it happened a year ago. But as it turns out, it doesn't really matter, because 47% of users, they haven't changed their passwords in 5 years. And when we asked them, at the 10-year interval, there were still 20% of users that hadn't changed some passwords in 10 years. So it's really, really stale information that's out there. And that's the perfect environment for somebody who's trying to crack into your account. And so because of that, people's trust is naturally eroding in passwords. When we ask people about this, and non-technical consumers, how much do you trust your password? Only 30% said that they were extremely or very confident that their passwords are going to protect their online identity. And what they want, though, is they want something more, but the majority of them didn't know, 6 out of 10 didn't know what two-factor authentication is. They didn't know what to do about this. And what these folks want is 70% of them said they want an extra layer of security. They want something additional, but they don't know what to do about it. And so what we did at Telesign is we started a consumer campaign. It's called Turn It On. You can go to this website at turnon2fa.com. And so this is designed to be a consumer website. And what we have there is, so it's free. It kind of defines 2FA so that people who don't know what 2FA is, they can learn about it. We have real-world examples of why you should turn on two-factor authentication. And then we actually take you step by step through instructions for all the popular sites that are out there and tell you how to turn this on, how to make yourself more secure. And then it's something that if you see something that's on there, and we've got kind of the top 150 sites in the world, and it's not there, send us an email, we'll add it. And it's just basically an online resource that you can refer people to. So I can tell my mom or my sister, I can tell non-technical people, go here, and here's how you can make yourself a little bit more secure. And so now I'm going to do a little bit of a live demo, which is always interesting. And so there it is. So hopefully everybody can see this. Can you see it? Yeah. Good. So here's the website. You can. So let's try a few examples here. So let's type in, since we're here at Google, let's type in Google and do a search. And we can see here that Google's got lots of things that you can turn on: Gmail, Google+, Google Cloud Platform. So if we go into Gmail, just click on that. And this one is very easy. You can just log into your Gmail account, and then you can click on your account photo, and you can go and it'll take you to the account settings page, and then you have the option right there to turn on two-step verification. At that point, you can scroll down to the sign-in section and just turn it on. In this case, you can you give a phone number. It'll send an SMS to your phone. And then it will ask you, do you want to make this a trusted computer? And that's it. Register the phone, enter a secret code, make your computer trusted, and then all of a sudden your account becomes way more secure. And then if you go to, and so what it'll allow you to do is that then you don't have to do two-factor authentication again. You can just do it that one time on that computer. If you go to a new browser, a new computer, you'll have to authenticate again. But it makes somebody substantially more secure. So since we're sitting here in Washington, D.C., let's take a look at another one. So Social Security Administration, they also have two-factor authentication. With them, it's just 3 steps. You can sign into your account as you normally would, and they will ask you some KBAs, some knowledge-based authentications. And then you basically give your phone number. They'll send a code to the phone, and then every time you log into your Social Security account, it will basically send a code to your phone, and you can be, that much more secure. So just do one more real quick. So we'll do Twitter. So Twitter, very similar. You can go to your security and privacy settings on Twitter, select the option to send login verification request to my phone. It'll basically send you a message in your Twitter app. It says, OK, send me a message. And then you'll get an SMS. You enter it, and then your settings are saved, and your Twitter account is secure. So on this site, what we have is also, we break it down into different categories. So we have the top websites on here. We have backup and sync, financial, banking. And so in all of these, what you'll see a variety of different ways of doing two-factor authentication. You'll see some are SMS, some are voice, some may be using a YubiKey, some will be using a FIDO-enabled device. But this is how you can direct consumers to this so that they can turn on and get secure. Oops. OK. So a couple of resources. Turnon2fa.com. Go to the website. You can also go to the Telesign site. At Telesign, we basically have the full consumer account security surveys there. We have information, press releases, everything. We have a community to help consumers get themselves more secure. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Judge. I work with the National Cybersecurity Alliance. I'm going to find my clicker here. And we have been working on the Two Steps Ahead campaign over the past year and a half. We good? All right, we're there. All right, thank you. We've been going around the country talking to folks, someone mentioned it up here earlier, that we just need to get the idea out there to people. So what we've been doing is going coast to coast, talking to folks about enabling two-factor authentication, partnering with folks like Telesign, the FIDO Alliance, getting the word out there, letting them know what the FTC and NSTIC are doing, and making sure that people have an idea of what's available to them. You're a part of the official first Two-Factor Tuesday. We're hoping that this becomes a national and international movement. The first Tuesday of every month, we're going to be asking folks to engage online and sometimes in person at live events to start engaging in adding two-factor to accounts. So if you add two-factor authentication to an account today, that's what we're going to ask of everyone that's here today or watching online. Go ahead and tweet about it. Use the hashtag Two-Factor Tuesday. Use the memes we've created. And then we're going to start asking companies to join the movement. So what we picture is a company that is a partner for Two-Factor Tuesday. On the first Tuesday of every month, they will send something out on their social media or to their staff, to their staff's families, and try and encourage people to use this great technology. So we're creating the memes. We're going to create the tweet posts and the Facebook posts for you. We'll do all the work. We just ask you to help us spread the word. We want to thank Google, the FIDO Alliance, NSTIC, Yubico, and the National Cybersecurity Alliance for helping to put together a fantastic event today and bring together all of these great minds. Whenever I'm speaking to the general consumer out there, they get a little bit scared. They say, well, where are we going? Is the internet going to be okay? Passwords, this is really scary. And I say, you know what? There's some very, very smart people. I say it every time. There's some very smart people working on a better way to protect our accounts. And I show them a video about FIDO Alliance. And today we got to see some of those smart people that I talk about every time I'm out there. There are great people working on this, as you've seen, and there is going to be a bright horizon coming very soon. So thank you, everyone, for keeping us on the right track. I'm going to call up Michael Kaiser now to close out the session.
Thanks, Kristen. And I just want to say, these efforts that we've been doing around the country have been fantastic. And, we're having a discussion here in Washington, but we've been talking to the consumers out on the road, and they really are receptive to this. I mean, they do get it about a lot of the ways that you were talking about. And the other thing that I just want to say in closing is, first of all, thank you to Google, who's been tremendously supportive of NCSA in this effort, and also giving us this great space today, which we are always deeply appreciative of. Thank you to all the people online who joined us today. It's really important that we get the word out here. We encourage you to join Two Factor Tuesday. The hashtag is hashtag Two Factor Tuesday. We really count at NCSA on a couple of things. We count on people who know about this stuff to turn around and teach people to their left and right about this stuff, and in their communities, to go to their schools, to talk to their families, to be the expert for people so that they can learn how to do this. But we also count on what you saw here today. We are not going to solve any of the problems in cybersecurity unless we work together. And when we talk about National Cybersecurity Alliance, National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, our theme is our shared responsibility. And that just means that no matter where we sit, no matter what you do, we all have to be doing something. And today, it's turning on two-factor authentication. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Really appreciate everybody coming and joining us online.